Charles Firth, thank you for talking. We recently talked to DGen's Michael Veitch about Australian comedy, and he said satire is pretty niche in this country, given the Chasers touched almost every form of print and broadcast at one point and reached number 2, I think, in the ratings in '07. Do you agree with him?
I don't think we were 2. I think we were number 1 in the ratings in '07, weren't we? Right. Let's fact check that. Yeah,
I'm just trying to think if Footy Show's probably up there or something.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's just totally untrue. Like, if you look at our numbers, even now, 19 years after we started on social media, we have an enormous reach, and it's interesting. There's people who are sort of making political comment of a more serious nature who are far better resourced than us. We're just still a few fuckwits in a room, who don't get that reach, and I think it's partly because comedy in this country really travels.
Do you ever feel like you feel that the Chaser as a whole has contributed equally as in terms of, has per dollar spent been a more effective way of communicating news and politics to people?
Yeah, I think so. I think not only does it communicate well, I think it also cuts across political persuasions and things like that. I think a lot of people who read our stuff don't necessarily, follow our politics or anything like that. And I think that's one of the things that is really good. I think it's a persuasive engine.
That surprises me to some extent, because I must admit I wouldn't go on, if Breitbart had a comedy section, it might, I don't know, I haven't read it. I wouldn't go on there to read it. So people who don't agree with you still listen to the satire and still listen to the comedy?
Well, but it's not I think there's a sort of false, in a lot of media studies, there's a false sort of thing of left wing or right wing. I don't think we're any of that. I think it's more about, are you poking fun at those in power, whether they're left wing or right wing or whatever? And I think that's why it's so appealing at a broad, sort of very mainstream thing. Because if you're actually making fun of powerful people, that's just immediately appealing.
Is it harder these days to find an audience for your satire, or is it becoming steadily easier with the audience fragmentation there is now at the moment, and so on, or has politics just cut through it all?
I think it's a lot easier to find an audience. I think it's extremely much harder to make money out of them. And in actual fact, all the ways in which we're still bankrolling our stupid enterprise are the traditional media forms. It's either broadcast deals with legacy TV networks and things like that, or literally print publications, like literally asking people for money in bookstores and newsagents and things like that.
So that's working. The Chaser Quarterly is working.
Yeah, but you don't get nearly that sort of money out of online. Like, there's just, you can't. Like, I don't know how anyone makes money out of that space.
I've been trying to figure that out recently, and I'm on the same side as you there. I'm not quite sure how either. Now, actually, on that point of funding, and you mentioned, I must admit I was a bit confused by it during the presentation, that people are funding Australian culture across the world. I want to look a bit back home. Channel 10's now owned by CBS. Well, I guess my first question is how long until the Chaser sells out to MSNBC, what? Are we at risk of losing our culture in Australia, like comedy culture in Australia? Because you go to Channel 9, it's 2 broke girls and 2.5 men. It's number 2 in Americans, that's all.
Yeah, well, but I think, I don't think they've ever particularly funded Australian, bleeding edge comedy. What excites me is that...
Graham Kennedy.
Yeah, well, I suppose that's true. Yeah, I suppose that is true. But I suppose what excites me is that actually... you now you can't make it in this country without going and getting overseas money. But what that means is it hasn't stopped us from continuing to tell Australian stories or indeed doing Australian comedy. It's just that we've got to do it in a way that's so craftful that it actually travels everywhere. So I actually think it is a renaissance in Australian comedy at the moment. I think there's a lot of really good comedies, like television comedies, coming online, that Netflix and Stan and things like that are picking up. And there's much easier access to international finance for that stuff than there was even 5 years ago.
And finally, I guess a good question on boundaries, I guess. Have you ever said no to a satire piece? Should people say no to satire at times? Is there a boundary that you just do not cross?
I would say every day there's something that you say no to, because absolutely, there's things that go too far, and part of the skill and the craft is about treading that line between making an audience uncomfortable but still being on the right side so that you're unassailable.
Is that something you find through trial and error? Because I'm just thinking make a realistic wish at the moment.
Yeah, but I would defend that sketch that sketch was based on talking to lots of doctors about their experiences with, charities and things like that. And I think the actual satirical point was actually there in that sketch. I think actually, if you look at what happened there was an outrage thing that went on. Like, it didn't actually get out, right? It was days before anyone even noticed that and millions of people had watched it. Like, it was a constructed outrage. But in addition to that, I think it was also miscast. I think literally, it was one of those things where perhaps there was a craft problem, but actually, in terms of the actual fundamental idea, I think it was actually sound. Yeah.
Thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks.